Hey everyone, this is Tony D with a serious video for Star Wars fans. Now, I know some of you have held on to Star Wars, and you're very nervous about the upcoming movie, and there's every reason to believe that your fears are well founded. The leaks coming out about the final Star Wars movie are horrendous. George Lucas himself was not even invited to the premiere, and there's all sorts of rumors flying. I would just like to give you some advice as a Star Wars fan, original Star Wars fan, who bailed after The Phantom Menace. Star Wars, one of the reasons it was great, and you have to understand the time that Star Wars came out, and I made a video about this before, but I'll recap. In the late 70s, movies were sort of at their creative peak in a lot of ways. There was this great renaissance of 70s movies. It was a lot of urban dramas, a lot of drug-related dramas, Serpico and The Godfather. You had movies like The French Connection. Everything on TV was a cop drama, cop show. And so in 77, when Star Wars came out, it was different for the movies at that time. There had been, even though these movies were really good, a lot of them, they were very dreary. I mean, it was dreary to watch a movie about criminals, about corrupt cops and bank robbers, where people would die. Marathon Man, that was another good one. I think it was early 80s, though. Anyhow, these movies tend to be dark and dreary. Star Wars was pretty light. Bubblegum movie, it was called. It was compared to Flash Gordon and the old serials from back in that day. And it had a wide appeal. And movies at that time, it was kind of like, TV at that time, we really had three major networks. So if you saw something on TV, chances are when you went to work and talked about it, everybody else saw it too. So if there was a hit movie, chances are everybody saw it. It's not, the fan bases weren't as atomized as they are now. You can watch a movie now on Netflix and go to work and nobody knows what the hell you're talking about. You can watch a movie on Hulu or Amazon or pretty much anywhere and people just go, I don't even know that movie. That's not the way it was back in the day. When Star Wars came out, people knew the movies that came out. Not that many movies came out, and they were all kind of in the theater. So, there'd be some art house movies that maybe they didn't know. But for the mainstream movies, everybody kind of knew all the movies. And if a movie was a hit, it would be in the theater for a few months. Star Wars was in the movies for a solid year plus, okay? Unheard of at that time. It was the biggest blockbuster of its day. Everybody I knew saw it. I was 11 when Star Wars came out. Everybody saw it. My parents saw it. Their friends saw it. And they all talked about it. They weren't science fiction fans. And so for the geek community, this was like manna from heaven. We had Star Trek, but then when Star Wars came around, it was like, oh, finally, people are going to be cool with aliens and stuff. The other great thing about Star Wars is everything about the movie and a lot of the original trilogy tended to imply there was more of a world to see, right? So a classic example is the cantina scene in Star Wars. The cantina scene, it's got all these different aliens. It just seems so random. And then you got the guys who bother Luke and Ben Kenobi, and they're like, I have the death sentence on 7 systems. That guy. It implied this bigger galaxy. It wasn't even just the Empire. Having the death sentence on 7 systems, that would imply that there are all these other systems out there that maybe the Empire didn't have control of. All these different aliens, It was too wild. It was like the Wild West. And you came out of an era of Wild West TV shows and movies. not too much further back, that's what was hot. So all that combined to make this amazing movie that had a wide appeal. Then you get, a few years later, you get the sequel. Now, by that time, it was already a hit, so at that point, the studio started to get its grubby mitts on things. Lawrence Kasdan comes in, and he, I think, injected, legend has it, some of the more personal aspects, that Luke, I am your father kind of aspects. And that made it very personal. And it turned out that was a good thing, because, again, it was basically popcorn, bubblegum kind of stuff for the time. Very simple. And by putting in the personal touch, this really sort of made everything work. It explained why Vader was so, ruthless an adversary, yet didn't just like shoot everybody. He couldn't. There was more on the line here. There was more to it. Also, the spiritual aspect of the Force, which I talked about in a previous video, was there. The Force was God, essentially. And so you had Yoda in the second movie saying, Luke says, I don't believe it, when Yoda lifts up his ship, and Yoda says, this is why you fail. It's about faith. So these were big universal truths that appealed to everybody. Excuse me. And again, the movie was a pretty big hit. Then Jedi comes out. Now we got a trilogy. And when you got a trilogy, what you have to understand, it's kind of like, each movie is 3 acts. A trilogy is kind of like 3 acts. So really, the first Star Wars movie is Act 1. The second Star Wars movie is Act 2. That's why it ends so dark. And the third movie is really Act 3, which is why it's mostly all payoffs. It's just fights and payoffs the entire time. And in 83, I believe that's when it came out, the geek community did criticize it quite heavily, especially for the Ewoks. This, to me, was the first sign that Lucas was kind of starting to betray his own vision, because the original concept was going to be Wookiees. It was going to be the Wookiee planet in the third movie. That would have been significant because we learned more about the main characters, and Chewie was a main character. So going to his home planet at the end, we might have learned so much more about him and maybe how him and Han met. We didn't know at the time how they met. I think that was, from a creative standpoint, a poor choice for Lucas to turn it into the Ewoks. Even though, Ewoks, Wookiees, the letters are, it's like an anagram. People criticized him at the time. I didn't want to see teddy bears in the movie, but we kind of accepted it because it was like, well, it's the last movie. Most of it was pretty good. We don't like the Ewoks, but we can sort of just tolerate it for George, and it was over. Now, when you get into the prequels, and one of the reasons I bailed, after I saw The Phantom Menace, at that point, I felt that Lucas had completely betrayed his vision. When he turned the Force into midichlorians, basically he was undermining that sort of spirituality that was a very universal concept in the first, the original trilogy. Additionally, there was all sorts of terrible problems with The Phantom Menace, and, we could go over them endlessly. I'm sure you've seen videos which have done that. And this is the most important movie, right? The Phantom Menace should have been the most important movie. It should have established everything. And instead, it just doesn't. It just, it just fumbles around. And maybe by the second movie, you get some pieces in there. And then by the third movie, it starts to coalesce. Because the one thing that's fairly consistent throughout the Star Wars franchise is there's always an empire. The problem is empires are easy. It's easy to make the empires. They're bad guys. They have uniforms. The stormtroopers are literally clones, and they're all the same. So it's easy. They just steamroll everybody in their path, and they're evil, and you could shoot them. So the problem is everything that came before, and I said this in my previous video, isn't outlined well enough. It was all implied. The original trilogy, it was all implied that the Empire had steamrolled all these planets and killed people and taken over. But there was something before, and they were just dealing with the remnants of that, outside the Empire. But when you get into a movie that actually takes place before the Empire runs things, the world doesn't work. Because, I don't know, Lucas didn't map out that part. He spent all his creative energies, I guess, on the original trilogy. So by the time he went back to that, I don't know if he had the chops to even do it. It just felt like a retread of everything. Not like a retread, well, a prequel retread, where you just take, we'll go back to Tatooine, and, we'll throw in Jabba the Hutt, and a young version of Greedo, and, all these different things, and then follow Anakin. We didn't need to see Anakin's origin. It was better that it was implied. So when they talk about, your father betrayed the Jedi, we could imagine in our heads the betrayal, that the betrayal was really bad. To actually see it, and Anakin murders a bunch of children, who wants to see that? What kind of there's no uplifting message in that. It's just, he's just a sad and pathetic character that fell into the dark side. And Lucas tried to make the prequels almost like kids' movies. They don't really work that way. You have a guy murdering children. That's pretty bad. So in my view, Lucas had already betrayed his vision with the prequels anyway. So what are you saving here at this point with the sequels? They've done everything in their power, in my view, to get rid of the original cast and foist these other characters upon you that have little to no value. And it feels like everything's just an insane money grab. And they even went back to Lucas to try to bring him back and fix the movie, which, if you watch, there's a YouTuber named Baron von Doomcock, who's very funny. He's got some real information, apparently, on the leaks and the fact that Lucas apparently was brought back, fixed the ninth movie, and actually made it make some kind of sense. And at the end of the day, they decided to go with another cut of the movie. So if they ever release that cut, I'd almost be interested in seeing it. But when you have Hollywood guys saying, well, Lucas saved the movie, well, that's a pretty low bar at this point. Star Wars didn't exactly start out super high. It was a pretty simple movie. And to say that franchise, which they, in my view, basically ruined, but he managed to save, I mean, you just have to get it merely to the level of competence at this point. So you have to ask yourself, what's the point of seeing this movie? It's nice to have loyal fans, and there were loyal fans to George, and to some extent that paid off in that for the prequels, the Revenge of the Sith, it got better after Phantom Menace. I was out, but it got better to the Phantom Menace. But that felt like, to me, it was really resting on the laurels of the original trilogy. The closer you get to that, the better the movie got, the better the prequels got, right? And there was lots of stuff I would have done with it, but the bottom line is, when you try to substitute this woke Hollywood nonsense, this inclusivity and diversity and feminism, and that is all portrayed as, hey, you better watch the movie. Meanwhile, they're calling the fans toxic, but they're putting out this ideology as a reason to see a movie. That's, to me, a sure indicator that they have no movie. It's like when they advertise the soundtrack of a movie. That's usually an indicator there's almost no movie to see. But the music's going to be really good, so maybe you'll tolerate it. Yeah, we made a crap movie, but maybe because we keep throwing feminists the bone, you'll actually like it. Hollywood is, unfortunately, a town that follows the trends, and being woke is a trend. And with the Star Wars franchise, they decided to follow it down the rabbit hole. The original trilogy was a trend breaker. Now it became its own trend, and then with the prequels, I don't think George really followed the trends all that much. He just kind of tried to continue sort of what he did. I just feel like he's so into video games, he almost didn't know what a movie was anymore. But, and I respect that, but I just didn't like it. It didn't appeal to me. And I didn't feel that I should reward George with my money if he couldn't make a decent Phantom Menace movie. I mean, seriously, dude. In my view, it wasn't even as good as Return of the Jedi. And to me, that's a big problem. Especially when you have book after book after book after comic book after... I mean, there's so much material out there in the realm of Star Wars that could have been used. And there's really a lot to it. And with the expanding universe, the constant expanding of the universe in the original trilogies, the prequels, and certainly the new ones, felt like they were shrinking. Especially the prequels, because they would go back to the old characters, only they were young. I saw Solo. I didn't want to, but a friend of mine dragged me to it. It's just a brutal movie. And, it's young Han. And again, it just doesn't work, in my view. It ignores what went before to a large degree. And that kind of history was important. History is important to movies. Just is. If they're all going to tie together and the universe is going to be consistent, and that was a problem with Solo, the Kessel Run. They mentioned the Kessel Run. Oh, I did the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs, or whatever he says. To actually see the Kessel Run, stupid. You don't want to see it. You don't want to see everything. And that just, again, is more of the universe, that universe collapsing in on itself. That was just a throwaway line in the original movie. Then it becomes something important because everybody quoted it. So they needed to get away from that and do new things. But they can't because they're not visionaries. Lucas was at least a visionary. You may not have liked Jar Jar Binks. I don't think anybody did, really, except little kids. But at least it was his vision. I don't think J.J. Abrams has any vision. He's a competent filmmaker. I mean, I thought the first Star Trek was decent, a good reset. But then the moment he said, oh, well, we're going to remake Wrath of Khan, I said, what, are you out of your mind? You dummy, you've just reset everything. You can do anything you want. Why would you remake a good movie? But that's Hollywood for you. They don't want to take any chances. They meet in big rooms and write screenplays with 10 people in the room. That is mediocrity by committee. And I think that's what you got here. You got mediocrity by committee. You've got fourth wave feminism mixed with diversity and inclusion. And when you're throwing that stuff out, you don't really have a movie. So vote with your dollar, Star Wars fans. Don't give these guys your money. You're going to tell them that you'll watch anything if it's terrible. And every indication says this is probably going to be one of the worst movies ever. This may be a Star Wars bomb. Let it bomb. Because there's plenty of other good sci-fi out there. There's the Expanse. Everybody tells me that's amazing. That should be supported. Nobody's supporting it because they're too busy watching the umpteenth reboot of Star Trek and Star Wars. What about the Expanse? It's new. Check it out. Check out some new stuff. Support the new. At least check it out. Don't keep going back because you're too lazy and you're worried that, well, it's not going to be good. At least this will be something. These guys could make things good by hiring the right people. They do it with The Mandalorian. Everybody raves about that. I don't know how good it is. I won't see it. The well's been poisoned for me. Don't ask me to say it. I'm not seeing the last Star Wars movie. Don't give these people money, is my advice. Then you send them a strong message. Better yet, they get fired and maybe they'll hire some good people, some good writers who know what the heck they're doing.